Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omniviewer, and welcome to Genre Bender's Obscurities and Flawed Gems, where we take a look at the best stuff you've never seen before. I don't really care about the Academy Awards these days. I used to, but I eventually came to realize that the Oscars are politically driven, actively biased, and, for lack of a better term, rigged. It first really struck me during the 2006 ceremony. Dreamgirls, a musical that was hyped beyond all belief, considered a favorite, and ultimately forgotten after getting completely snubbed, had not one, not two, but 3 songs nominated in the Best Original Song category. That's 3 out of a total 5 slots. So, statistically speaking, the odds were in favor of one of those songs winning. And they were darn good songs, too. Just look any one of them up and give them a listen. Instead, however, the song that was deemed Oscar-worthy was a song featured in An Inconvenient Truth. Let me just make that perfectly clear for you. The song deemed Oscar-worthy that year, the year, by the way, that the Oscars announced they would be going green, was a pop-rock song that featured in an environmentalist documentary hosted by former Democratic Vice President Al Gore. The only way they could have made it a more politically driven choice would have been to have marched a donkey spray-painted blue across the stage as they presented the award. I paid attention after that, and I began to see all sorts of patterns that made predicting the winners far too easy for me to really enjoy the thing anymore. Is your movie a hard-hitting, realistic drama? Does it involve war? Does it involve disease? Does it cover a topical issue, but not so topical that it's going to alienate people? Was it animated by Pixar? If you answered yes to one or more of these questions, then congratulations, your movie just won an Oscar. Yeah. I really don't have any love for the Academy Award these days. I still watch it, though, mostly because I'm hoping that maybe this time they'll surprise me. In 2009, I did get a surprise. The Best Animated Feature category, which quite frankly should be eliminated entirely because it's an insult to everybody who works on those films, but that's a rant for another day, opened with an interesting gimmick. Characters from the nominated films sat down for interviews to share their thoughts on what it was like to be at the Oscars. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is when this little girl appeared.
Wow, just being nominated is brilliant, because more people will discover our film, and me. And I got to come all the way from Ireland. I might get to meet that nice Mr. Martin with the lovely silver hair, like mine.
I couldn't help but wonder who that was. In fact, most of America couldn't help but wonder who that was, because nobody had ever seen her before. Within moments, we learned that she was a character from The Secret of Kells, an animated film from Ireland that, through some strange sequence of events that I still don't fully understand, had somehow managed to get nominated in spite of not having a theatrical release stateside beforehand. One of the major requirements to get nominated for an Oscar if you're a foreign film. Now, The Secret of Kells didn't win. In fact, it never stood a chance. It was running against Pixar's Up, and a Pixar film pretty much wins an Oscar the moment it gets nominated. But even so, based on the few clips shown during the ceremony, I knew that this was a movie I had to see. There was only one problem. One concern, you might say. What were the odds that an animated film from Ireland was going to get released over here in America, even after getting a nod from the Oscars? As it turned out, the odds were very good. After a very, 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 very limited theatrical run, during which I'm fairly certain the movie was only ever showing in 4 theaters at a time nationwide, it was released on DVD. And you'd better believe I snatched it up as soon as I could. So what is this movie, and why should you care? That's what I'm here to tell you. Let's take a closer look at The Secret of Kells. Actually, before we do that, let's take a look at what inspired it. You are currently looking at images taken from the Book of Kells. The Book of Kells is an illuminated text, which adapts various stories from the Bible, specifically the New Testament, using pictographs. The art is known worldwide for its intricacy and use of color, and the book itself is considered a national treasure in its native Ireland. Not much is known about the book's early days, so The Secret of Kells presents us with a completely fictional but nonetheless fascinating origin for this national treasure. Welcome to medieval Ireland, specifically the village of Kells. Under orders of Abbot Kella, a massive stone wall is being erected around the town, for this is an age where the Vikings roam Europe, laying waste to every village they find in their never-ending search for gold and glory. Brendan, Kello's nephew, has lived here his whole life. He has never been outside the wall, and his curiosity about the world beyond is tempered by his fear of what may await him there. One day, Brother Aidan arrives from Kells. He is a master illuminator who has been fleeing the Vikings, and has with him a very intelligent cat named Pengarban, and a most incredible book. The Book of Iona, which will eventually become the Book of Kells, an illuminated text still being written that, it is said, will turn darkness into light once completed. Brendan, himself aspiring to be an illuminator, is eager to learn from Aidan, even though his fear makes him hesitant to follow the eccentric old man. After learning that Aidan needs something from the forest to make ink, Brendan does the unthinkable and sneaks out of Kells, journeying into the forest. It doesn't take him long to become lost and in danger, but that is when he meets Aisling, a childlike spirit who can become a wolf, and shall become both his guide through the forest and his friend. Thus begins Brendan's journey towards becoming a master illuminator. No easy task with the abbot focusing so wholeheartedly on his wall, and the Vikings looming ever closer on the horizon. The short version of this review is that if you are interested in any branch of the arts, any of them at all, The Secret of Kells is required viewing. I don't want to hear anybody saying that they're not interested because they don't like animation or fantasy, or they don't like religious subtext in their films, or they don't want to get involved in film at all. I don't care. You would only be making hollow excuses. Mark my words, everyone can gain something from watching this film. From an artistic standpoint, The Secret of Kells practically speaks for itself. The animation is highly stylized, nowhere even close to realistic, instead portraying the essence of the characters literally. Brendan is childlike and innocent, so he is small and has soft features. Abbot Kella is meant to be a powerful, imposing figure, so he is a powerful, imposing figure, towering over everyone else like a statue. Brother Aidan is meant to be a wily old coot with a good sense of humor, so he looks cartoony. Aisling is a woodland spirit who is not technically human, so everything about her appearance reflects this, from her ash-white skin and hair to her massive eyebrows and occasionally visible fangs. The Vikings barely even appear human themselves, looking more like demons than mortal soldiers of fortune. Such characters might not be physically possible in the real world, but The Secret of Kells is ultimately a work of art, and so this exaggerated style is exactly as it should be. This is how you picture somebody in your mind's eye. The exaggeration also extends to the settings. I refuse to call them backgrounds because that would downplay their significance. And trust me, they are very important. The world in which these characters live is even more stylized than they are. There's a recurring motif of straight lines and circles permeating each location, which will be discussed a bit later as they serve a very specific purpose. Also hidden throughout each setting, especially in the forest, are various images from Christian and Celtic traditions, as well as hidden bits of foreshadowing. Every time I watch this film, I notice somewhere some new little detail that I didn't see before, and suddenly it's like I'm seeing the movie all over again for the first time. If that doesn't say rewatch value, I don't know what does. The style also allows the animators to play around with perspective, sometimes making scenes look otherworldly, other times adding depth to what is an otherwise flat image. It's sort of like what you might expect to see if a stained glass window could move, though not as literally as we saw in young Sherlock Holmes. But there is so much more to this movie than just the visuals, though some people can't see beyond that. I distinctly remember reading at one point a review from Entertainment Weekly, which said that The Secret of Kells was very pretty wallpaper with about as much depth, and ultimately there was nothing beyond pretty moving pictures. Now, I don't know if the critic who wrote this review is still in film criticism with Entertainment Weekly or anywhere else, and I don't know if this critic is even watching this video, but if you are, you need to shut up. You need to turn in your press badge and never say another word about cinema ever again, because you have no idea what you are talking about. This movie is dripping with substance. Enough to fill an entire book. Then again, I don't want to keep you here too long, so let me just touch on the highlights. First of all, the characters are very complex, more so than most live-action films can lay claim to. In any other movie, Brendan would be a rambunctious youth who rebels against the wicked authority of the abbot at the insistence of the anarchic Brother Aidan. In fact, quite a few movies have followed that exact plot, and you can almost predict exactly what's going to happen each time you see one. Brendan and Aidan would have been the obvious heroes and Kella the obvious villain, but this is not the case. While there is conflict between the two parties, things are not so black and white. Kellos certainly obsesses with completing the wall around Kells, but he's not without reason. He has a responsibility to protect everyone in the village, and he has witnessed firsthand what the Vikings are capable of. His intentions are good, even if he has allowed the fear that motivated them to completely take over. Aidan does not hate Kella, and respects his authority, and his conversations with him are attempts to bring him out of his fear rather than vilify him for being a small-minded coward. Brendan, meanwhile, is a child raised in an environment where faith in God was central, but fear of the world surrounded it. His childlike faith and childlike fear are in constant conflict with each other, and part of his journey towards becoming an illuminator, and by extension an adult, is learning which one is more important to him and which one must be tempered. And then there is Aisling. Where to even begin with her? She is just so wonderfully complex. Like Brendan, Aisling is a child, and her view of the world is about as simple, but it was raised in a completely different environment. An environment of wild animals, predators, and prey, where she's had to fend for herself. And being as good as she was at it, she's become the leader of a pack of wolves, rather than a follower like Brendan. She too, however, lives in fear of something. The dreaded dragon Crom Cruach that slaughtered her people long before the events of the film. She has just as much fear to overcome as Brendan does. In fact, her fear is far more concrete, and yet it is still something she must do. Aisling also has no faith base, and while we're never actually told if Brendan converts her to Christianity or not, he certainly does give her something to believe in over the course of the film. This is just as much about her growing up as it is Brendan, which is fascinating because she has technically been a child for several hundred years. Add to that her physics-defying movement, and you have one of the best female characters ever seen in recent years. But wait, there's more! The Secret of Kells may very well be the most thematically heavy movie I have ever seen. And nearly every theme you can think of plays a role in the film at some point. But the biggest one, and by far the most important, is the idea of fear versus faith. Remember that recurring motif of circles and lines I mentioned earlier? They come into play in this part of the story. Their placement is not random. Straight lines frequently represent fear, while circles represent faith. We can see this within Kells itself. The scriptorium, where all the texts are written, is comprised almost entirely of curves and round edges, whereas the abbot's tower is ramrod straight, looming over everything, much like the abbot himself does. We also eventually see it in Crom Cruach himself. This bizarre dragon moves entirely in straight lines. When he turns, his body forms corners and sharp angles, rather than the curves that we are used to seeing from serpentine creatures. How he is defeated is one of the most brilliant moments of the movie, but it only really makes sense in context. So again, more incentive to see the film. The movie is also careful to know when each shape ought to be used. For example, we know from diagrams that the wall around Kells is shaped like a circle, but we never see it as such. Every time we see the actual wall, we see it as a square, because it's a product of fear. Even though it was meant to protect civilization, it's technically become an unhealthy obsession. It's a twisting of something good into something bad. The list of themes could go on and on. For example, the movie provides an interesting deconstruction of the man versus nature theme by questioning whether or not it should even exist at all. Yes, Brendan is afraid in the forest at first, but he eventually learns to see the beauty of it, and it serves as his inspiration when he takes over completing the book. There's Christian symbolism hidden throughout the environment, as if to say that it's all God's creation, so we need not shun it. The contrast of the beastly Vikings versus everyone else in the cast is an interesting example of barbarism versus enlightenment. The changing of seasons reflects the character arcs. The faith versus fear theme works in tandem with a hope versus despair theme. I could go on about these themes all day long, but instead I'm going to leave them for you to discover for yourself. But do you want to know what the most amazing thing is? The most incredible thing about how this movie goes about presenting its themes? It's subtle. Nowhere at any point in The Secret of Kells is there any dialogue or imagery that specifically tells you what the movie is about. There are no metafictional monologues about the themes. There's nothing of that sort. Because it trusts you and respects you as a viewer to know what is going on, whether you're an adult or a child. Speaking of which, though, is this movie safe for children? That, of course, is the question that always comes up when you import an animated work from another country. I personally think it is. Make no mistake that it's dark. Very, very dark. The movie does not shy away from the fact that the Vikings were ruthless, cold-blooded killers. And while there's no actual gore, by the end of the movie there is a lot of death. That being said, though, I grew up in a generation that watched Don Bluth movies, like All Dogs Go to Heaven or The Land Before Time. 2 movies meant for children that featured death, and murder, to be quite honest, without shying away from it, but by no means glorifying it either. I watched those when I was a kid. I turned out mostly normal. If you're a parent who has children that want to see this movie, you may want to watch it with them, but otherwise, yes, they can definitely handle it. Regardless of anything else, The Secret of Kells is a nearly perfect movie. It is dark and hopeful, simple and complex, mature and childlike, dramatic and funny. I don't really know what else I can possibly say. See this movie. No excuses. Okay? Okay. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omniviewer, signing off.
You must go where I cannot. Pangerbon, Niels a sail shock you.
You can't find out everything from books, you know.
I think I read that once.